Welcome back to Al Jazeera English here in Washington. With most of the American eyes on the primary races, there was a bit less comment this week on George Bush's Middle Eastern visit. But it did mark a determination by Mr. Bush to make something of a last-minute difference to US relations with the rest of the world. But has he left it too late, people are asking? Can George Bush, in his last few months, really make a significant contribution to world peace? I'm delighted to be joined by the US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Colleen Graffy. Welcome, Colleen. And by Professor Akbar Ahmed of the American University here in Washington. Welcome back. Welcome back to you both. Can he do it? Can he do something in the last 10 or 11 months? Did he make a real start this week? Start with you, Ahmed.
Not substantive difference, David. At the same time, remember, symbolic initiatives are very important in the Middle East. They do matter. And the fact that the President of the United States is in the Middle East meeting the heads of state, obviously very intimate in some senses, that stroll down the palaces in Saudi Arabia hand in hand with the King of Saudi Arabia. These are images that do make an impact to show people there that the United States and the President of the United States, these aren't basically intrinsically hostile to us, that friendship is possible.
That friendship is possible. Colleen.
Well, as you say, it's the symbolic gestures that are so important, but it's also some of the important impacts America is making in areas like the First Lady going to the Middle East for breast cancer initiative, an area that's often not spoken of, but is so important for the people. We're setting up dialogues bringing Muslim Americans to the Middle East and also to Europe in what we're calling citizen dialogues, finding ways of engaging with the people to show that Islam is part of America. There are over 1,200 mosques in the United States. And so to reach out in friendship, both symbolically, but also person-to-person contacts, helping to make a difference, we think is very positive.
And what about the first headlines were obviously about Israel and Palestine, and in fact talking about compensation came up, and the fact that we must get back to pre-1967 and so on and so forth. On that specific subject, what does he have to do next, do you think?
David, I don't think he can do very much, but just the fact that the President of the United States has reminded both America and the world that there needs to be a solution based on that two-state solution, that back to the old borders, the fact that Jerusalem is also on the table, these are very important statements for him to be making at this stage. I don't think he can do very much, except, again, give some hope. And in the context, background of Iraq, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, with which he's associated, so he carries a lot of baggage in the Middle East, this initiative of his does give hope.
Hope.
Hope, and that is a very important word when the situation at times seems utterly hopeless.
And at the same time, you have a situation where time is very short, obviously, I mean, to make a difference, isn't it?
Well, it is, but there's so much that can be done in a year. And the fact that this president is the first one to call for an independent and viable Palestinian state side by side with Israel is hugely important. But we also have to remember some of the things that are happening elsewhere in the world. For example, PEPFAR, which is the President's emergency aid in Africa and throughout the world on HIV/AIDS relief. The United States has put over $18 billion into this, and sometimes we forget that this has the most enormous impact on the lives of people throughout the world. No other country in the history of mankind has given more money to eliminate a single disease. Also, another project on malaria. So there are things that can happen that are changing the face of a continent due to passionate, compassionate caring about other people.
And do you think that in the time that remains, hope is the one factor that's there, but do you think he can transform his image, really? I mean, there are things, it's like the AIDS thing you mentioned and so on, which don't get much coverage, but are quite positive. But do you think he can? Is he doomed to be judged on the first 7 years?
In some senses, I would say yes, David, because the anti-Americanism is very, very high in the Muslim world. The good news is that it's shallow, it's not very deep, and it can be changed, it can be tackled. Again, as I said, symbolic initiatives, substantive initiatives. Some of the latter need to be picked up and taken perhaps by his successor, because this needs to be a long-term engagement, a holistic approach needs to be implemented, and a vigor. And we're seeing a little bit of the off-on situation with this administration in terms of the Middle East. This trip of his should have been taken many, many years ago.
Let's also think of the tangibles. Afghanistan. This is a country that's had 2 elections where we now have women voting, where we have little girls who had not been to school before. Now we have 2 million going to school. I see where healthcare, less than 10% had healthcare, and now over 80% of Afghans have healthcare. Now you try telling them that the Bush presidency hasn't made an impact on their lives, and they will disagree. Over 70%, 80% are very positive about the American presence in Afghanistan. And I'll add one other thing, is climate change. The Bush administration is really making some progress on climate change. There was a view that the administration didn't believe in climate change. And of course, over $37 billion has been spent on research and development in climate change. I don't think you'd spend that much money on something you didn't believe in.
One lightning question, Ahmed, to you. What should America do in the post-Bhutto era?
In Pakistan, it must emphasize above all free and fair elections, without any question, because again in Pakistan anti-Americanism is again very, very high. Pakistanis are looking very suspiciously at the events surrounding Benazir's death, all sorts of theories abounding, and the talk that perhaps elections will be postponed, perhaps Musharraf will be propped up again by the Americans, all kinds of theories. That has to be dispelled. Free and fair elections, number one. Number two, the process of democracy must be encouraged, whatever happens. And eventually, I believe Pakistanis will get it right.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Very much indeed for that vision of the future and so on. We thank you very much indeed. And that's about all from this special edition, the special US edition of the programme. Next week, we'll be back in London. I hope you can join me then. And when we come back to Washington, join us here. Join us wherever we go, please. Thank you. Bye-bye for now.